Hello and welcome to Sky IndyCar. Joining me today is the race journalist and IndyCar expert, Jack Benyon. And we're going to be talking about all the drama that's been happening on and off track in the last few weeks in IndyCar. Now, if you remember a few weeks ago, it was Andretti Autosport and the great fallout at Mid-Ohio, followed by one or two issues with Alex Palou and his contract saga with Chip Ganassi and Arrow McLaren SP. And talking about Arrow McLaren SP, we've had Colton Herta in Europe as well, testing the Formula One car at Portimao. So Jack, plenty to talk about in a very short window here.
Yeah, absolutely, Tom. Thanks for having me on. It's been a busy couple of weeks, definitely for me. I haven't slept as much as I probably would have liked to. And looking forward to getting into it. I'm interested to hear where you want to start with all of this list of news.
Well, should we go chronologically in order with Andretti Autosport, the quick fallout that we had at Mid-Ohio? Everyone seems to be back singing from the same song sheet, but is that just a ruse, or are there still underlying issues there heading into Toronto?
I don't think the underlying issues are solved, let's put it that way. I still think there's going to be some underlying tension in that team for the rest of the season, but we saw Michael Andretti quite heavy-handedly having a drivers meeting after that race and telling his drivers in no uncertain terms exactly what he expected of them. And that was not what he saw at Mid-Ohio, which I'm sure won't surprise anyone. That's just good management. So he'll be hopeful that he's done enough now to kind of calm that storm. And obviously all the other news that's broken in the time since will definitely have helped sort of brush that story under the rug a little bit. But I don't think we'll see things come to a head quite as aggressively as they did at Mid-Ohio. I think that was maybe coming for a little while. And it was also a set of circumstances that maybe were kind of unlikely and all came together at once. And it was a bit of an unusual situation. I don't think we'll see all that again, but I definitely don't think that's the end of this story. And I still think there'll be some underlying tension for the remainder of the season.
I talked to Alexander Rossi a few weeks ago, and he said the street tracks are very much what Andretti Autosport are targeting. Obviously, we know Colton Herta goes well around the street track as well. Romain Grosjean hasn't been to Toronto. It's a track that's sort of been dominated by the Chevrolets in the sort of last 7 years. But for Alexander Rossi, what a great way to bounce back if he can come out of this weekend with a good result.
It's really difficult, isn't it, trying to decide who's the favourite this weekend. We know how good that Andretti street course package is. And even Meyer-Shank Racing, the affiliated Andretti team, has got a great chance with its street course setup as well. So it's, there's also almost an additional 2 cars with Simon Pagenaud and Helio Castroneves there. Obviously, Simon Pagenaud won this race the last time we were here in 2019 and one of his most dominant IndyCar performances. So he'll be someone to watch. Yeah, and Alexander Rossi would love to continue that run of form he's had before Mid-Ohio and try and get back to that, resurgent. And he was so phenomenal in Detroit. I think a lot of people credited his performance in Detroit to his strategy, but without his blistering pace, that strategy wouldn't have worked. So it was just as much down to him as it was down to the strategy. So that was a great performance, and I'm sure he'd like to see that again. Looking elsewhere, it's really difficult to try and judge. Obviously, Penske have won all of the street course races this season. 3 different drivers winning those 3 races. So it's hard to see past them at the moment, especially as Simon Pagenaud was driving for them in 2019. So Penske are kind of the reigning winners here. Scott McLaughlin back on form after the last race. So he'll be one to watch. Joseph Newgarden and Will Power as well. Obviously looking forward to this race. So yeah, it's going to be a really interesting one. And the track's just so phenomenal. It's so difficult to work out what's going to happen. There's different surface changes all around the track, which really makes it difficult to judge the grip. The track will rubber in across the course of the weekend, which will really upset setups, and the drivers will have to adapt and try and even predict what the track's going to be like when they don't know what it's going to be like, which is going to be really difficult for them. And then, if you look at this track on a picture, a circuit map, it looks really straightforward. There's a couple of long straights and some tight and twisty stuff, but the brake pressure is so vital at Toronto. These drivers really working on hitting a brake pressure number every single corner, and that's going to be vital. Getting the car stopped, that really impacts the handling, getting the front of the car turned in and really being able to capitalize on those slow speed corners. So the drivers who are a bit more technical in the championship might have a bit of an advantage. But saying that, even Simon Pagenaud took, I think it was 7 or 8 attempts to win this race, even though slow speed corners are one of his kind of specialities. So I'm really excited, as you can probably tell, for this weekend to see, where the lay of the land lies. And we've got 13 drivers, including the reigning IndyCar champion, who've never been here before. So they're going to be interesting to watch how quickly they can get up to speed as well.
Well, that's what I was going to touch on, the 13 drivers that haven't been here. I think it's only 4 in the current field who have ever won around here before. But one of those drivers, and this leads me on nicely to the next topic, who's never been here, reigning champion Alex Palou. Now, I went to bed earlier this week to a tweet from Chip Ganassi saying Alex Palou will be staying with the team effectively. A wonderful quote from Alex, very buoyant and positive. And I tweeted about the silly season jigsaw puzzle coming together with that news. I then woke up to the news that Arrow McLaren had also laid claim to Alex Palou. And Alex had put those tweets out regarding that quote from Chip Ganassi and how excited he was to be joining, not Arrow McLaren SP, but McLaren, I should clarify, because we don't know where he might be going if he does join McLaren. But that's a fairly long-winded explanation as to what has happened. What's your take on this? Because this is drama and this is the news on the tip of everyone's tongue.
Well, when can you say in motorsport that two, giants of a championship both lay claim to the same driver in the same season? It's basically, you have to go back to Jenson Button and his battles in Formula One to really see any kind of story that's anywhere near as, similar as this. And yeah, similar to you, really. I saw that whole thing developing. We'd heard a bit earlier in the week, had some sources that had confirmed that the deal wasn't as dead as maybe some people thought it was at this point. I think the story of Alex Palou to McLaren had kind of been brushed under the rug after, months of speculation and Zach making maybe not a public approach, but I think it was fairly obvious to everyone that it was McLaren would be, looking for Alex's services for 2023. And it seemed that story had died down. But earlier in the week, we got some confirmations that that definitely wasn't dead. And then we had the news from Chip Ganassi Racing with that all-important quote, which said that Alex was looking forward to racing for the team next year, which then meant that all of the journalists had to write that story because, Ganassi had triggered the contract extension for next season, which they have an option on, which is a normal thing in IndyCar, a standard kind of contract deal where you do 2 years and then there's an option for a third. So that wasn't a surprise. And with Alex confirming that he was going to race there next season, that all seemed to conclude the story. And then we had the news that Alex denied that quote could be attributed to him. It wasn't his, and that he was going to McLaren. So now we basically have to wait for this to unravel slightly. I think to simplify this and bring it down to the basics, one of these two teams has got something wrong in how it interprets Alex's contract, because they both believe that they have him for next season and that he's going to drive for them. So whatever happens, one of those teams is wrong and one of them is going to prevail. I think the most likely scenario here is that Zach is going to have to buy Alex out of his Ganassi contract. I think the Ganassi move to say that they'd extended his contract was just wise business, because it means now that, the ball's in McLaren's court, really. If it wants him, then and this contract is binding with Ganassi, then McLaren is going to have to buy him out. So we're starting to get into some contractual complexities, Tom. But this story, the bottom line is, I don't think it's going anywhere anytime soon, and it comes at quite a bad time for McLaren. I think this has been, not really publicised very much, but it's fighting across multiple championships, as anyone who watches Formula One knows, and the news that they're heading to Formula E as well, and need to get the Formula E driver lineup sorted. It needs to know whether it's going to move Felix Rosenqvist over to Formula E from IndyCar, which is where he is now. And they can't really do that if they don't know where Alex Palou is going to be racing. And to be honest, Daniel Ricciardo has confirmed that he's staying on in Formula One next year. So there's no available seat in Formula One next year. So the only likely, landing spot for Alex Palou at McLaren is in IndyCar. So although they've not confirmed that's where they expect him to race next year, that's what we're expecting from the outside, and the only kind of logical conclusion. But this all needs to be sorted out quickly for McLaren, because it needs to get all of its ducks in order and get everyone into their seats ready to compete in championships as soon as, later this year when Formula E starts.
Yeah, we all await that news with bated breath. And there was, rumours that Alex wouldn't even be at Toronto. That was quickly put to bed with his, I think it was his Instagram post. He was off to Toronto yesterday, but I think that's the only decision, the wise decision. I think that the sort of weight behind those rumours were that he was in breach of contract, but if you know anything more than that or not.
I think obviously the Ganassi had to explore all situations at that point. They couldn't have predicted what was going to happen with McLaren, that they were going to announce that they'd signed Alex Palou. Obviously Ganassi to a certain extent made their announcement and then put the ball in McLaren's court. So I think once once McLaren had laid claim to Alex, then Ganassi had to pursue all options, whether that was, parking Alex for the next race or parking him for the rest of the season. They had to explore that, because they've got a driver who's basically rebelled against them and said that he's not willing to drive for them next season. So it's only, fair business that Ganassi have to evaluate all of the options. And Tony Kanaan was supposedly the favourite for jumping into that car if anything had happened, but he rubbished those claims on the Brick by Brick podcast earlier this week. So I don't think there was anything really there, but I think I think that was speculation, but also I think there's some truth to the fact that avenue will have been explored, even if it wasn't seriously explored, because they really do have to, this is, as we said earlier, this is unprecedented territory that both teams are in here, and trying to work out, what's next. Any good team and, a team that's been in IndyCar for over 3 decades, like Ganassi has to explore all its options at this point. And I guess we're going to see Alex at least for the next race and probably till the end of the season. We've got to remember that he's 4th in the championship, and basically, not much of his season has gone wrong, apart from the double points Indy 500, where, that obviously went wrong for him. He had a poor finish there, and that's really hurt his position in the championship. He'd be much higher up if it wasn't for that. So.
And Road America, of course, but without that, we got 3 races in the next couple of weeks. Going back to TK, loose lips sink ships. I think he's rather enjoying the sort of soap opera around this news, isn't he? And his sort of and his place in terms of holding some of the information. Leading on from that story and keeping on the McLaren theme, Colton Herta in Portimao this week would have been very hot. Colton's the type of driver, and I've sort of followed him from British F4 when I was in the Carlin fold, when he was up against Lando Norris, a rough diamond, very underdeveloped, but just had this raw potential. He's the type of driver, and we all know those drivers that can do this, that can get in any type of machinery and be quick within 10 laps. And those are the types of drivers that can secure deals, that can also raise eyebrows. Colton, when I realized he was testing this week, he is certainly the type of driver, in my opinion, who can get in that Formula One car and cause a headache. He can do something a bit like Kimi Raikkonen did when he jumped in the Sauber and went quicker than the Lazy very, very quickly, or Jensen when he jumped in the Williams. He's the type of driver, and everyone can say, no, they're full, this is the situation, that's the situation. But when you have somebody of Colton's potential who can do that lap time, it's going to cause a headache for Zach. I mean, we're hypothesizing because we don't know exactly what he did at Portimao, but he did go well. But certainly, if those engineers report back saying, we've not seen this, and we always have those heroic stories is what I'm getting at, then things can move quickly in Formula One.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with what you say, in the sense that Colton's definitely someone who can impress over one lap and raise some eyebrows. I think maybe the other thing to factor into this, or to kind of give some background about how this is going to go down now and what this actually means. If we go back to 2018, when Lando Norris was getting his FP1s at McLaren, the pace wasn't necessarily the thing that McLaren is looking for, because if a driver has reached the stage where he is testing a Formula One car for McLaren, then they know they're quick, and that's not something they're particularly evaluating. It's more hitting consistent lap times across a stint as the tyres are degrading. It's the kind of, let's say, surprise setup changes they'll make, and they'll analyse the feedback of Colton. So they might change something on the car and send him out on track, and then ask him to feedback about how the car felt and what it was doing, to kind of work out how his feedback is and how detailed it is, and how up to speed he is on that side of things. And also just general consistency of his stints, his driving, not necessarily the actual raw speed, but the consistency of hitting the apex. Just, all the numbers, all the data they have in the background is braking trace, and all that kind of stuff will be evaluated. And all those things are what Lando Norris did so well back in 2018 to persuade McLaren to take him on. So I think, McLaren will be digesting all of that data now. They'll be going back and looking at what Colton was able to do. It'll take a couple of days for them to to go over all that and really understand it. But yeah, I think it sounded from my mind, the only other thing that they'll be what we're looking at was his preparation and how well he was ready for that test. And that's one thing that Colton did fantastically well, that we can definitely say on the record, that his preparation for this test was fantastic. He's been working a lot on his neck and working a lot on his physical training ready for this test. So that's one thing that certainly impressed McLaren. I can tell you that was, how well prepared he was and how mentally ready he was for this challenge. I guess the only other thing to add is it came against the backdrop of Danny Ricciardo confirming that he'll be in the car for McLaren next year. So all these people that Zach is offering free practices and Formula One tests to across the IndyCar grid, they're kind of being backed up into this queue now, and they're going to be fighting over, who gets those 2 outings in the actual official FP1s, which is, part of the regulations. You have to run a young driver for 2 practice sessions this year. So, if my money's on anyone, it's on Colton in the USA and Pato in Mexico, but that might change between now and then. We might even see, who knows, however this contract situation goes, we might even see Alex Palou in the car before the end of the season. I don't think that's out of the question either. So a lot going on, a lot of junior action going on at McLaren, and they'll definitely be evaluating those drivers closely to work out who's best for them.
If you look at the big hitters currently outside of a Formula One seat, you've got Oscar Piastri, who's right up there. Then you've got Colton Herta, Pato O'Ward, and Alex Palou. There's not many if you had to pick a top 5. And McLaren arguably have 3 of those now. I mean, they're going to end up with an almighty headache, and someone's going to be disappointed, because Pato was disappointed at the beginning of the year. There's no doubt that the Colton news put Pato's nose out of joint, and he didn't take that particularly well. They had an arm around him, released his deal, the confidence is back. Colton news is old news. The equilibrium's back. Pato's singing on song. But what about now with the Alex Palou news and the possibility that he might be fighting Palou off internally and for a Formula One seat?
I think there's always been an underlying confidence from Pato O'Ward that, he beat Colton across an Indy Light season, and that I think, deep down they're good friends, the pair of them, and they obviously raced together at Daytona earlier this year and had a lot of fun doing that. But I think there's an underlying confidence from Pato that if it comes down to him versus Colton, then he'd have a good chance and that he would be able to kind of beat Colton to that. But yeah, Alex Palou coming into the fold here, obviously a reigning IndyCar champion, really quick ascent, even faster ascent than Colton Pato, if you look at it, because he's obviously, he's had 1 season in IndyCar and then gone and won the championship. Obviously, he's a little bit older and has some, maybe more varied experience across his CV, but in general, even quicker rise in IndyCar than the other 2. So yeah, I think they'll both find Alex Palou threatening. I think even more immediately than on the F1 side, Pato will be interested to see how Alex comes in. And he's been a fantastic teammate to Scott Dixon, Jimmy Johnson, and Marcus Ericsson at Ganassi over the past season and a half. But obviously, we're throwing Alexander Rossi, Pato O'Ward, and Alex Palou into the mix potentially for the McLaren, trio next year, if that's what happens and Alex does make the move to McLaren. So as we've seen at Andretti this year, it's not easy to blend drivers together all the time, and it can prove an issue for the team management. So, I think there's plenty of spin-off stories that, we haven't even thought about who Ganassi are going to replace Alex Palou with yet, or even talked about that. And, these are the kind of stories that are going to run on through the off-season, I think, and give us plenty to talk about.
Just before we finish, Alex Palou, cool, calm and collected. This weekend's going to be a real test of his result, because he's only human and it's going to be frosty. It's going to be difficult. He's never been to the circuit. I'm really intrigued to know how mentally fit he is for this weekend, and intrigued to see how he goes.
It's very interesting, actually. I think just talking about the track specifically, I think that's one that will suit him, and I think he'll adapt quickly, and we won't have any sort of problem there. I think he'll be immediately on the pace. I think the off-track stuff that you kind of alluded to there is more interesting in the sense of how he handles all of this pressure and all of these questions. He's speaking to the media shortly after we finish recording here, and I'm sure there'll be a lot of stories coming out from Toronto. And just generally the atmosphere in the team is going to be unusual, because Alex's stance for the past few months is that he's happy at Ganassi and that he's you know, he didn't want to upset his crew or anything, and he hoped that they weren't being distracted by the rumors. He enjoyed the rumors. He said he loved it when he spoke to the race, that he was being connected to these other teams, and that he was, you know, someone who was being targeted by other teams to be the leader of their project. That's what he called it. He was really, you know, he found that really enjoyable, and really he was proud of that. I think that he's got to a point in his career now where, you know, he was a driver in GP3 as it was then, now Formula 3, who ruled out going to Formula 1 because he didn't have the budget and he didn't think it was a possibility and it was ever going to be on the cards for him. And, you know, now he's raced his way into a position where he's a proper professional driver. He's, you know, arguably one of the best drivers in the world, or up there in that category. And he's proven that he deserves, you know, he's proven to McLaren at least that he deserves a chance to drive a Formula 1 car as well. So, you know, this massive ascent, you know, it's incredible to see. And Alex has really driven to deserve all that. But I don't think he's really faced a mental challenge like this one. Well, this is an unprecedented story, so no driver has faced anything quite similar to this. So this is going to be an unusual one. What I will say is Alex's character, for a start, I don't think Alex wanted any of this. I don't think he's someone who likes negative publicity. I know he's someone who absolutely loves his 10-car team and the crew that work on his car every day. And it'll be breaking his heart that his team are having to go through this, and that they found out that he was moving to McLaren in this manner. That must have been, you know, really hard for his team, who've, you know, pushed him to be a champion. You know, they will have really struggled with that. But at the end of the day, he's made his decision, and now he's got to, you know, cope with the consequences of the decision that he's made. And it was always going to be a difficult decision, and perhaps an unpopular one in many ways, of him leaving Ganassi to go to McLaren. There'll be people questioning why he's doing it when he's just, you know, won the championship with a team, and he's in the team that's just won the Indy 500 with Marcus Ericsson as well. Why would you want to leave that? You know, he'll point to the chance to drive a Formula 1 car and the opportunities that McLaren potentially has, you know, outside of IndyCar as much as inside it. So it's a really interesting story, and how Alex, you know, copes with this. Just going back to his character, you know, he's someone who's really driven. We've seen him, you know, one of the things that underpins his success is how cool, calm, and collected he is. So I don't think this story is going to, you know, drive him to making mistakes, or is going to impact how he drives on track. I think as soon as that helmet comes on, Alex Palou is going to be the same Alex Palou that we've seen, you know, since he joined Ganassi, and there's going to be no change there. But the off-track story is going to rumble, and he's just going to have to get used to that, because this story is going nowhere.
Yeah, you've got to be ruthless and selfish to a certain extent at the top level. He's somebody that handles himself with extreme grace. It was almost surprising to see him emotive after the Road America incident. You know, he's got that sort of Roger Federer-esque approach to things, hasn't he? So we wish him well. He's the most lovely chap. And as you've quite rightfully said, I don't think he'll be enjoying this at all. He'll just want to get out on track and do the business this weekend. Talking about this weekend, I've got the times here. Friday 7:30 free practice 1, Saturday 3 p.m. free practice 2, Saturday 7 p.m. quali, Sunday 8 p.m. the race. That's UK time. So wherever you are in the world, please adjust your clocks to that. That's Sky Sports F1's coverage. Jack Benyon, you've been an absolute pleasure, a joy, and as always, a fountain of all information. I've been Tom Gaymor. We look forward to joining you this weekend on Sky Sports F1. Use the hashtag SkyIndyCar if you've got any questions. But for now, it's goodbye.